welcome to this Flash Forum. I'm Sarah Babb. I'm really pleased to be with you today. We'll be exploring 5 ways to get out of stuckness. So I've been working with leaders and teams through complex issues, through challenges, scenarios, transitions for many years, and researching it and lecturing and facilitating and coaching. And often I see that we get to a phase where we feel quite stuck, where we feel quite overwhelmed, and we're really looking for ways to move forward. So it's a pleasure to be with you today to share some of those lessons learned, 5 ways that we can shift through stuckness. I welcome you all here. I look forward to connecting with you. And I'd ask if you can put your questions into the Q&A session, then we'd be most happy at the end to consider some of those, to get into some conversation around it. So welcome. For our first consideration, it really is that here we are on day 28 in the lockdown of this global pandemic, and a number of us are feeling different things. So to kick us off, I'd really like to ask you, how are you feeling right now? So please type in 1 or 2 words in the chat box. How are you feeling right now? Just 1 or 2 words. Let's get some of those thoughts through. So if I think, yes, a number of us feeling quite apprehensive, tired, guilty, stuck, frustrated, alcoholless, yes, all these lockdown frustrations, exhausted. So we get into the spiral of feeling really that anxious and overwhelmed growing, and it leaving us quite overwhelmed, feeling us quite fatigued, mood swings. A colleague said to me yesterday she feels as if she's a yo-yo, sort of moving between one or the others. And that confusion is perfectly understandable in terms of where we are now. We just do not know. And a number of those experiences come from really a loss. So a loss of routines, daily routines, a loss of daily rituals, a loss of daily identity. So I remember when this started, I started self-isolating. So I'm at a home, I'm not sure who you're at home with, either with yourself, with your pet, with your family. And I have a 79-year-old and a 7-year-old at home. So we started self-isolating. And then my mind was tricking me, saying, we've got this, we've got control, we can make things happen. Next thing, the lockdown came. Next thing, the restrictions, and we feel a sense of loss of control. We feel a sense of loss of agency, that we cannot actually make choices for ourselves. And that leads to a sense of loss of power, a loss of sense of where we can actually move to and what's possible. We become hypervigilant. We become, actually, all our identities are on call all at once. So at the same time, we're being asked to be a parent or a colleague or a friend and a leader and a homemaker and a learner, and actually to be able to make choices and decisions. So that loss of boundaries makes it really hard. Without this lockdown or this pandemic, we have natural rhythms and routines that we move through. So when we wake up, we're engaging, maybe that first cup of coffee, that getting ready for driving to school or getting transport to school, dropping off at school, going to work. Even before a meeting, there are a number of rituals of greetings, getting the drinks, where you sit, where you make notes. So actually, we've blurred all of those together, and they found that actually there is a thing called Zoom grogginess and Zoom fatigue, because I don't know about you, but we're moving Zoom meeting. We don't have that sense of moving in between, and we don't have a sense of those boundaries and that transition. We even maybe feel a sense of loss of those symbols of power that we might normally have as a leader. So we're unsure, and if we take a look at the next slide, what we're really feeling is, how do we move between that loss and between that feeling like we've lost our moorings? And here's where we want to look at, how do we do this? Now, for me, this is definitely not only about how do we work with lockdown, how do we work with constraint, but more so, I'd invite you to think about these as capacities of leading in complexity. Of those capacities, if we can just nurture these capacities, this is what will stand us instead in ongoing change, in ongoing uncertainty. Because I think our minds also trick us to say, oh, but we're here tonight, certainly in South Africa, other countries may be facing other anxieties of when does lockdown start or finish. It's not about just this period. As leaders, we need to be aware of and really try and bed down those capacities to work with this. So we're almost fractals of a system. So imagine what you're experiencing now is what your team is experiencing, what your organizations experience, even what the world is experiencing. So what can we learn about that, and how can we craft new ways of actually finding out new ways of organizing, new ways of working, new ways of leading, new ways of being that better serve our economy, our society, and our planet. And the 5 ways I'd like to talk you through are starting with noticing. So what are we sensing? What are we understanding? How are we making sense of things? Then how do we let go? Because of a lot of this is about actually letting go of things that we thought we knew, things that did serve us but will not serve us going forward. And then it's not as if we're stepping into a clear roadmap where we know where we're going and we simply need to push go. We're needing to explore plausible alternative futures. What else is possible for me? What's coming up that I actually like about leading? Which industries, what becomes possible? And that's hard when you're feeling that stuckness, when you're feeling that in-between liminality, when you're feeling that fear, do I even have a job? Will my salary be cut? Will my organization exist? But this is what we need to build at Capacity, is just explore different possible futures. And then it's about trying some on. How do we try it on? We'll talk more about that and how I'm moving. So let's get into it. The next slide will talk us through that first capacity of noticing. Now, what these slides do is start off with, so what are we talking about here? Then we look at, so what does it mean for me as an individual? If I can build this for myself, and then what does that mean for leading? So I may have frozen, so let me know if I'm still coming through. I'll keep talking, but let me continue. I'm back, good. So the focus is on what are we noticing? Now, normally what I've seen is when people are in fear or uncertainty, they actually retreat and find that they're not able to look at alternatives or even connect with other people. We want to feel safe, our brains want to protect us, we find it hard to even have brain capacity to take on anything more. So the first thing is actually, if we want to shift, is to notice, what is going on for me? So the question of how you're feeling is not an arbitrary question, but a very meaningful question. If you can feel solid, if you can connect with who you are, then you can move. So here we're looking at how do we grow our emotional agility? And essentially, we want 3 kinds of agility. And CCL talks to a cognitive ability, how do we think differently about things, and emotional agility, so we don't get stuck, that we can move and move through, and dispositional flexibility. So how can we be differently? And this is what we can explore in noticing. So in the first question is, what I found quite useful, Susan David, who wrote the book Emotional Agility, says, if we can just name the emotion, we can unhook from it, we can look at it, we can say, what is this emotion telling me that I need right now? And the number of people that I've spoken to have said they feel out of control, they might be angry, and then they feel overwhelmed. But actually the emotion is saying, I feel like I need some control. What can I control? And then in simple ways, you can set up some steps to control some things. I never thought in my life I would say that I'd be so happy to finish washing up. But for me, washing up those dishes was such a symbol of being able to say, I can control something in my life. So what is the emotion? Unhook from it. What is it telling me? And most of all, accepting and acknowledging that every emotion is okay. As soon as we're layering on judgment, or I should feel okay, I must be cheerful for my team, I must be coming up with solutions, we're actually suppressing and not allowing that emotion to flow. So as a leader, what they've also found in change and in growth is that your team at this stage want a sense of safety, psychological safety, emotional safety, that they can have one place where they can connect as a go-to place, that they know they can come to you as a team, they can talk about how they're feeling, they won't be judged, but you are able to ask questions and reframe so we don't stay stuck in that. So there's not an emotional contagion that we all now feel fearful and angry, and this is happening a lot across organizations and countries. But as a team, you can say, let's acknowledge where we are. Let's take time in each Zoom call to look at each frame. Let's ask everybody to comment and make sure that they're found in communication, that it is clear, consistent, and compassionate, so that we're not jumping into action mode. So a number of you may be doing that already, and that's really a good start. So we want to look at the next capacity, which is beyond noticing, how do I let go? And this might be the hardest thing. So letting go, like letting go of that balloon, is we might have beliefs about ourselves or patterns about ourselves as leaders that won't serve us in these times. So, for example, I must be the expert on this. I ought to. And then comparison is the killer here. I see other people doing this. Why don't we have a solution? And so we get into patterns and beliefs that actually won't serve us now. And we either must have the answers or we don't, or we should be caring or we shouldn't, or we should always be energetic. We place these demands on ourselves. More useful for yourself, I'd suggest, is when we adopt a mindset that says we can be both and. We can be both and. So I'm thinking here of a number of organizations like call centers, BPO organizations that actually have taken different approaches. Now, some have said we're closing down, the risk of contagion is too great, we only have one solution, we can't make it work. Others have been really proactive in saying, actually, you can work from home. Here's some data, here's some instruments, very little that you actually need to help you work from home. I remember calling a call center the other day, she said, it's a little bit fuzzy, I'm at home, but I'm here for you. So by us actually being able to see alternatives and setting up different rhythms, we can help our teams do that. Important for yourself is to keep those new routines and new rituals emerging and trying new rhythms. So how do you start your day? Mark the start of your day in a way that serves you. Some people suggest walking around the house, making sure you dress differently, perhaps you set up your workspace differently. It helps you transition and helps you lessen the overload, lessen the burden. Then when you're transitioning, maybe you're doing homeschooling or some of your own reading or online courses, maybe there's a different space. Maybe then there's a transition back to home or to meal space. So this is all of it that helps you emotionally and cognitively staying open to change, staying open to variation, and making sure that it's not all just one of this merging into one of the other. Somebody said, how can it be a weekend? We're in a weekend. What day? It's this a day, that a day. So marking time, marking routine, marking that we can see alternatives helps us. As a leader, one of the most useful tools is to notice again where we're trapped. What do we need to let go of? Some of the traps we need to let go of are our mind traps. Now, these mind traps serve to protect us because our brain wants to be efficient, it wants to understand, but that also stops us from moving forward and stops us from actually seeing alternative ways. So one example I want to share there is the example of control. So our mind wants to control, we want to have answers. Now, Jennifer Garvey-Berger suggests we can just ask simple questions to get out of those mind traps. So when we're in control, we want to actually be able to make decisions. But what if we're not in control? What if in times of complexity, we actually don't have that control over the bigger system? So the questions we want to ask us is how can I actually see three alternative stories? What if I were wrong is a great question. What if us disagreeing can help serve us to actually move forward? So by simply asking us these questions, we can shift ourselves out of mind traps. So what we want to do then is move into looking at alternative futures. So let's take a pause here. If we've been able to notice where we are, both myself and my team and the system, if we've been able to then explore that a little bit further and see that we're not trapped in confirmation bias or believing that we know or not understanding, we want to then shift into being able to say, so what else is possible? What else is possible? Now, one of the questions that was useful from the mind traps is, instead of saying, how might I make the future happen that I want or that I think ought to happen, I can be saying, what can I enable here? What can I enable here? Another way of asking that is, what do I want actually to achieve? And it links a bit to your purpose and your values. So do you want an organization that's more inclusive, that a culture of learning can be fostered, that a psychological safety can actually be achieved? And these questions of what can I enable is one. Another one, I think, in these times, a good question that can help you overcome overwhelm and stuckness is to say, in the future, if I looked back, what do I want to remember about myself in these times? Do I want to remember that I was feeling this way? Do I want to remember that actually I was able to support and care for a team, that I was able to craft different ways, that we showed courage in moving forward and connecting. So by simply asking those questions, we can shift out of stuckness and be able to let go and begin to let come some different futures. So the truth is we do not know. So in complexity and uncertainty, having multiple stories, multiple possibilities about yourself and about your team can really help. And here is a way you maybe just write down or even talk to people and say, imagine if there were no limitations. How might I want to explore different strengths, different careers, different ways of leading? So this might be about, I know somebody yesterday who was saying, actually, I've just realized, for me, this is so important that we can work with solving poverty on a global scale, and that actually that's where I want to focus. And she started influencing her organization to use their manufacturing plant to make some masks, to actually make some protective gear, because that was driven by her seeing that there are different ways that the organization can serve. Even some of the airlines that are empty are offering or being able to support some of those big cargo deliveries of PPE. So having alternative stories. One of the retail organizations I was working with at the beginning, because they had a supply chain in Wuhan, didn't jump into, we're going to cut that supply, start another one. They actually went through a number of scenarios and said, what if the pandemic goes this way? What if it goes that way? And a very positive thing actually came out, because they started building South African suppliers, but because of their values, they didn't cut off the Chinese suppliers. So they have multiple now. They've built a strengthened supply chain that can help them go into the future. So it is important that we pause and say, if I'm sticking to one story, one simple outcome, and we don't know what the dynamics and the change are, then we can really feel that let down and not feel that we have confidence or agency. But by having multiple stories, by having an intention and a goal, but by having multiple ways to consider different ways, different options, it gives us a sense of power that we can change as circumstances change. Tonight, we might hear something about the lockdown reducing. We might hear something different. We know that global shifts are happening, that the economy, the oil price, affecting a number of industries and countries. But we don't know a determined way out. So our capacity to work with alternatives, to work with plurality is really what we want to focus here. So could you think just for a moment, what is one future self that might be becoming clearer to you? Now, the thing is, you wouldn't be having these conversations as a leader alone, so you would find ways of bringing those conversations into your team meetings. So what if there were another way? What if that were one way? How might we explore different ways? Because what we want to move on to in terms of the next capacity is, how do we actually try on different, experiment, have the capacity to be curious, to keep experimenting, to keep prototyping. So for example, if you're working with complex change in an organization, maybe culture change, you don't just have one way of doing that. You try, let's change policies, let's change procedures. If you're trying different, digitization is your way to go, you might find hybrid models in the meantime. You might explore. If this Flash Forum is exactly that, it's trying on a different way of connecting people to learn different capacities in these times. So going virtual. And from an individual level, this is asking about yourself. What is it that you're wanting to evolve and bring to the fore? Of course, you're making decisions, you're moving things forward, but at the end of the day, if you don't have those alternatives, if you don't have those different experiments, it's very hard to actually keep going. So instead of feeling overwhelmed, we can actually identify, and if we look at the last capacity, we can identify what they call micro actions or micro habits that we keep ourselves moving, that we keep trying different steps, we keep trying different sizes, we keep trying different habits. And certainly when we look at the neuroscience behind habits, it's not about just the intent, but it's about actually stacking up and supporting new behaviors. So if your intention is to grow into new markets, or to find new processes or ways of working together that can be inclusive, that can serve the market and the industry, it's not going to happen in one fell sweep. So it's really about saying, what are those steps that I can keep taking? And the big capacity is to keep moving. So how do you keep a momentum, keep learning, keep reflecting for yourself, but equally for your team? Otto Sharma talks about the voice of judgment, where our mind might stop us moving. He talks about the voice of cynicism, where we're not open to change. But at the end of it, it's about a will and a voice that we want to overcome, and that's the voice of fear. So as long as we can keep achieving little things, we're also keeping a momentum and a confidence going for us in our leadership. So one of the points I've added there under self is to actually finish something today. So if we're keeping our self-efficacy up, if we can finish one thing today, it will keep us confident and exploring moving forward. Now, one of the things about leading is really about, and I've tussled with this because a lot of people say, be optimistic, have a sense of a vision and a future. But I think that can also be a bit Pollyanna-ish, and we don't want that to be false because we don't know. And there is hardship. There is no doubt that in this pandemic there is hardship being experienced, families being separated, people that are in conditions that maybe do not have access to food and water as easily as they would have. So there's great variation in the experience. But for us as leaders to keep a sense of our own possibility, openness, wonder, hope, one of the simple suggestions is to each day just connect with a moment of wonder, a moment of awe. Ariana Huffington talks about it in Thrive. So imagine that I've been noticing the sunsets, sunrises for the first time. So actually just pausing and noticing. So looking at that smile, that first sip of coffee, that first smell of the morning air, whatever it is that can keep you awake and alert is important. How you are, the strength that you feel, the internal state of the intervener will impact the actual intervention. So keep learning. We want to keep hope-filled, but not necessarily giving false information, and being authentic around that. And I love the quote on the last slide. The next slide tells the quote by Václav Havel, who's a writer and was a dissident and in the Czech Republic and a president. Speaks there that hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for success, but rather it's an ability to work for something because it is good, not because it stands a chance of success. So how are we working for the good in terms of this time? Supporting the healthcare sector, connecting people that aren't otherwise connected, building a regenerative society and economy. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. I'm of the conviction that it is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. It is hope above all which gives the strength to live and continually try new things. So I wish for you over this time the hope to continuously strive, the hope to continue to have an impact where you can. And it really is with that we want to bring those capacities together. Number one, how do we notice what's happening? Really, in times of confusion and in times of overwhelm, that's one of the capacities we often retreat, we withdraw, we look internally. Then we want to say, but what is not, why am I staying stuck? What can I let go of? Maybe the belief that I should know, that we must have a strategy, that we must fix things, rather than letting things be and building circles of support. We need to have plausible futures. So what else might be possible? What else is coming clearer for me? Where could I grow myself? Where could I grow my team? And then we want to look at, so how do I try it on for size? So how do I keep stepping into different things? How do I keep experimenting and, of course, keep moving? So it really is a summary of ways to work together. There are a number of comments in the flash line, and I think absolutely, how do we explore ways of changing channels to get digital and observing behavioral changes? How do we sense make through our digital platforms? And being open to different perspectives, absolutely, and constantly experimenting. That's the most we can do, but for us it also means starting with self. So understanding where you're at and understanding, first of all, having a sense of self so that you can actually lead and be impactful with your teams. And whereas we step back into the new way, I'd hope that we're keeping a sense of what is that bigger vision and intention of building different reconfigurations. Brené Brown suggests we're building a new garment. And in fact, the garment was a bit broken before in terms of economic, global, societal and economic pressures. And here we have an opportunity of how do we actually create something new. Let's see, there's another question here. In my opinion, what's the best way to address a lack of productivity from a team member without being too hard and resorting to discipline? Great question. I think the first thing is to notice exactly that and have a one-on-one with that person and really explore below the waterline in the iceberg what is going on with them. So with some empathy and compassion, perhaps they're in that feeling of overwhelm. So through exploring what's happening, you want to ask not only where they're at, but what can they do to get out of it? What systems of support do they need? What is missing for them? What can you support them with? What can they support themselves with? And what do they need to move out of it? So you're holding them to account, but you're doing it with a compassion and a genuine listening. I found another question here. Thank you for that. Another question I find leading at this time is about exercising change management. Same principles. Yes, change management without a doubt. My concern with the traditional change management models, however, is it implies there's one change, like you're implementing an IT system. You implement it and then it's finished. Or a change that you're implementing a new policy or a new piece of equipment. And that's not the mindset that's useful for us. The usefulness now is a capacity to continually notice, continually shift, continually sense make, continually experiment, continually consolidate, so that our mindset doesn't expect it to be finished. I don't know. In fact, they found that about 65% of change is ever executed, if that. So part of it is because we expect things we plan from A, we plan to Z, and we expect it all to be finished. Meanwhile, the environment's changed, the stakeholders changed, the clients have changed. So rather the mindset of change, leading in change, as opposed to trying to manage and control change. So we have an intent, we want to achieve something, we work with these capacities, but we realize it will continually be evolving. And there might be times of overlap. So even when we're implementing a new system, we're needing to help people let go of the old system. When people transition a role, they're transitioning into a role, how do we help them let go of the old role and step into the new? So thank you for that, and it would be interesting to explore more. So with complexity, we're looking at what's emerging. How can we amplify what's working and dampen what we don't want to work? So for example, if you are wanting to get a more inclusive, a more dynamic, a transformed environment, how do you support those pockets where it's happening and grow it and then dampen what's happening? So we're expecting that multiple perspectives exist at once, but it's how do we actually use these capacities to make it bed something down and keep moving with that. Another question. Any suggestions on how to keep a balance between planning ahead and worrying, more especially for those in the tourism industry, where we know people might not be in a position to travel even after lockdown? Yes, and that's the exact dilemma. So thank you for that question. We need to plan, we need to have a sense of intention, we need to have little steps that we can take forward. If you're in the tourism industry that has key clients, how are you staying in touch with them? How are you even having innovative, collaborative partnerships with, for example, there's a lot of sites becoming available. So how could you put virtual tours together to keep people interested? And how can you acknowledge where your clients will be so they're in fear? I can't imagine that next time I get on the airplane, how nerve-wracking that might be. So are there services you can even offer in helping your clients transition back into traveling? Is there virtual tourism? Is there a way that tourism can help societies that are grappling with this? So it's about thinking of those multiple possibilities. It doesn't mean they're all going to be right and we can't guarantee success. That's the whole point of uncertainty. But how can we at least be trying it on for size, keep moving, exploring different partnerships, trying different ways? Another question. I'm feeling overwhelmed and my team is seeing this. How do I handle it? So I've seen one of the leaders that actually works in the airline industry express a similar question. And what she decided to do was actually just acknowledge it with her team and say, so much is happening. I feel overwhelmed. And that's where you ask questions. It's almost giving other people a permission to feel it. Without that first step of noticing, it's almost impossible to move. You know, we have to accept it's okay to feel overwhelmed. You're not alone. You're not alone. And if you can express that and hold a safe space for people to express it, then at least you have a kernel to move with. You don't want to stay stuck in it, and that's the trick as a leader. But once you've created that space, then you can move into the next capacity of saying, so how do I let go of that overwhelm? How can we as a team support each other? Maybe we have a longer check-in. Maybe we look at little things that we can achieve to build our sense of confidence and momentum and motion. And that might be what helps you move forward. And if you need to take a mini break, then please do that. Please do that, because it is about also caring for yourself in this. We have another question. The current situation, more storming than the simple change management. How do we adapt into leading with the new shift away from the usual way of doing business, where technology fails with the inadequacy of resources like electricity, telecoms, and interconnectivity? So if I'm understanding the question, it's not a simple change management, and we have a complex, exactly when I heard that load shedding might come back, I was just like, another complexity, another issue that we need to work with. And certainly not having access to data and not having access to technology is really impacting how people are managing with the lockdown and going into the future. In a way, this is where I say we need to look systemically. How are our bigger organizations supporting building those capacities? I'm not sure which industry you're in, but it really is again about saying, so where do we choose to focus for now? Where do we have influence? Where do we have control? I live in a suburb where a lot of people are supporting local initiatives for food parcels, for giving data. So how do we start having, again, mini actions, trying it on for size? And if you can influence bigger, then do so. But there might be also great innovations and collaborations that come through this. So we have another question. Thank you for these. How do you capacitate the team enough for them to appreciate the change? It's new, even to the leadership collective, and that their ideas and inputs are as valuable and very much needed during these difficult times. Entirely correct. We do not know, and leadership has been leading in a certain way. We're used to certain metrics, we're used to certain processes. We've always been calling for a more inclusive, more dynamic environment, and here's your chance to really build that in your team. How do you have that psychological safety? How are you really listening? How are you asking questions? How are you pushing your team to consider different ways and recognizing when that comes through? And this might be also then, how do you filter information up? So how do you bring forums together to have those conversations? And together, it is only through collaborations, through initiatives, through trying, that we can actually move towards any newness. Luckily, there's a lot of thinking being done. There are bigger visions that we can connect to. So thank you, and please do that. Please practice it where you can every day. How do you anticipate, the next question, how do you anticipate the shifts in what used to define great leadership in the old world and the capabilities required in the new emerging environment, physical presence, walking the corridors versus social media, short messaging skills? So I think you've answered the question in some ways. This is about what we spoke about: new rituals, new routines, new ways of connecting. And the irony is we have tension. So we're isolated, but in some of us are actually socially overwhelmed. So we have so many WhatsApp groups. We have pinging all the time. Even my mother's joined set up two bridge group WhatsApp groups, and she's got pinging all the time. So our physical presence might be different now. And that tension is that we're isolated, physically isolated, but how do we keep a social presence? You would work with with the platforms that you have. So how do you even, one of the suggestions is send physical objects. So physically, how do you send a note to somebody if you want to thank them? How do you speak one-on-one? Why aren't you, even calling one-on-one, not just relying on Zoom meetings? How do you communicate honestly and consistently? So the communication and the connection becomes more important. And anybody who's been working with virtual teams globally will know that it takes almost a bit of effort to build up that social capital, the trust, where you can have a connection, and then it becomes easier to connect around issues. If you're starting, a lot more investment will be required to actually build that trust, that openness, finding your own rhythm. Some teams work, they have a half an hour stand-up meeting still in the mornings to connect where things are. So try it on for different sides. What will help you connect the most? What will help you have an impact and give feedback? And certainly building one-on-one capacities through the teams and being open to changes. So Another question, how do you manage blocking out what is happening? Things will go back to normal. So I think that's a contested statement. I agree with you, block out what is maybe overwhelmed. So a lot of people are selecting what they focus on. So somebody who's working in healthcare is reading up on healthcare, following up on that, only looking at the news once a day. So maybe look at it at a certain time of day, you know you're going to look at the news. Put your WhatsApps on mute. So you control the inflow of information of what you want to focus on, what you want. Certainly there is no more normal. The world has changed. So as you walk into the world, it is different. Global powers are different. How we work open up possibility. We can work from home where a lot of people said we couldn't. We can build multidisciplinary teams and have a design sprint in a week with different people. We can have communication in different ways. We can be innovative in different ways. So it is different how we lead, what's possible. It comes back to what do we want that new normal to be? What intention do we hold for building better organizations that are more human friendly, better societies that are more inclusive and just and equal, better planetary care, that our Earth is so relieved to have this reprieve from humans at the moment, that we're even seeing penguins in Simonstown and dolphins in the channels of Venice. So we're seeing the lack of pollution just rejuvenate our planet. So the intention of what we want that new normal should be should come into our thinking now. How can we have better processes, better organizing, better support for our teams to keep growing into the future? So I really appreciate all the comments. There are a number of really interesting thoughts here on there is huge financial strain and uncertainty, and we want to continue selling our services and at the same time be sensitive and respectful to everybody with us. And I know that it's, again, as leaders, how do we handle that with our suppliers? I've had instances where I've had a call and said, hey, sorry, we can only pay you 50% of what you were going to get. And others have been far more considerate in saying, here are resources, here are other channels, how can we do this differently with you? And I would like to see that we can be partners with our clients, we can be partners with our suppliers, and partners with our partners, our families, to actually be looking at how do we set these new routines, new patterns, new ways of working and organizing and connecting. So I think this may be the last question from a time point of view. How do you anticipate the shifts? Oh, that was also in the question rule. So I also would urge you to stay connected in finding your own circle where you can be questioning yourself, putting out challenges, staying connected, and to keep reflecting. So that active learning, action learning is such an important thing now. We're learning so much. This world has never been through this. Some argue maybe the bubonic plague wasn't as an experience of this, but we're in a different place with technology now. But how do we actually help craft these solutions and see these possibilities? It's a real gift. It's so interesting we're alive at these times. In 50 years' time, how will we look back at these times, and our children or grandchildren or colleagues' children will be saying, what did you do in those times? So as leaders, I don't think it's about just being optimistic, but it's actually about saying, let's find that grit. Let's get into, as Brené Brown says, get into the arena. Let's try different ways. Let's keep talking. Let's challenge each other. Let's be open to exploring. So, of course, another question is if you're living alone, I think even more so, have built-in times for social connection. One of the things I miss the most is the casual conversations around a coffee. And now I need to sort of schedule a Zoom call. It's almost more difficult than usual. So it's been a lot to take in. I hope that these are really useful ways to work with stuckness and really practice these capacities to lead you into what will still be an uncertain and unknown future. But at least we can welcome it and know that we have some capacity to take us forward. So thank you very much for joining us. Please remember the Flash Forum tomorrow. It's about the future of education. So for those of you that are in it or have children around it, this is a fantastic way to connect. Thank you to the GIBS team supporting this, and we look forward to connecting again. Keep well, stay safe.